Hello, everyone, and welcome to Black Women Voices OKC, our conversation on race today. Let's talk about race. My name is Bailey Perkins, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. I'll start with a description of why we're doing today's conversation, go over the format, talk about some ground rules, and then I'll introduce our panelists so we can get right to the heart of the discussion today. We are having this conversation on race because last week, Governor Stitt hosted a conversation on race that didn't include community leaders on the front lines of justice, and it excluded Black women. And so we wanted to host this conversation as a way to build on the conversation of the things that we're missing from that dialogue. So we wanted to talk about the conversation that was had focused a lot on interpersonal dynamics and building bridges and having conversations as a solution to racism. But there's also a lot of social and health and economic disparities that exist that having those conversations won't dismantle, right? And so the ladies that we have assembled here will have a conversation about additional things that we need to know about systemic and structural racism in our state, things that need to be done to dismantle it, and solutions and ideas that they have. So we'll have a 5-minute conversation from each of our panelists today. I'll pose a few questions for discussion, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So please feel free to post your comments and questions in the live feed, and we'll take as many questions as we can. I do want to note that we will not tolerate any disparaging or offensive commentary. And so anything that's posted that is like that will be screenshot and deleted. So please know that before making any post of those natures. So now I want to introduce, before we go into the discussion, I do want to note that you can see our content on the Black Women Voices Facebook page and also the Twitter account. This is one of many conversations to come because there's so many Black women who have perspectives and expertise in different fields. And we want to make sure that they have the opportunities as well to weigh in on how evasive systemic and structural racism is on a variety of lenses, whether it's healthcare, or economic security, or law, or the media, wherever it is. We want to lift up the voices of more Black women in this metro. So please be sure to stay tuned and like the Black Women Voices Facebook page, follow the Twitter account for further updates and information. So now I want to take a moment to introduce our incredible panelists this evening. I'll start from the top left corner that I'm seeing and introduce from that direction. So I want to first introduce Camille Landry, who is a community leader. She's engaged with Black Lives Matter OKC, and she's the owner of Nappy Roots Bookstore on the east side of Oklahoma City. Want to introduce Chaunte Gilmore, who is in the top center, who is the leader of New Leaders Council Oklahoma, which is an organization designed to train and recruit progressive leaders in the state of Oklahoma to help advance progressive issues in the state of Oklahoma. So we're excited to have her. We have to the right of Chaunte Gilmore, Skye Latimer, who runs Folded Owl, and she is an incredible leader too. We're excited to have her. On the bottom left side that I see is Councilwoman. I often call her Congresswoman. Councilwoman, get it right. Nikki Nice, who is a well-known advocate and supporter of all things Northeast Oklahoma City and Ward 7. So we're excited to have her voice and perspective here. And then to my right, we have the powerful, dynamic Reverend Sheri Dickerson, who leads Black Lives Matter here in the state of Oklahoma. So thank you all for joining us. And before I get into asking our first question, I'd be remiss not to add a special thank you to Erica Lucas and Tracy Zeke, who you do not see but have put incredible labor behind the scenes in helping today's moment happen. And so we appreciate their support and their view that, you know, an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. So we appreciate their support and advocacy for Black women. So now let's get into the discussion. We'll start first with Camille Landry. Our question is, what was one key thing that you noticed that was missing from the governor's conversation on race that you'd like to lift here? So Camille, you'll have 5 minutes to tell us what that one key thing was that you saw that was missing.
It was a feel-good conversation that never got even skin deep. It was about personal interactions that don't have anything to do with the structural racism that afflicts us in this community and in communities throughout America. It was about a teacher making a Black child feel welcome in a classroom in which Black children's needs are not addressed. It was about shining, you know, putting pictures of shining Black children's faces on the bulletin board in that classroom, but providing that child with a substitute teacher for the entire year, and thus robbing that child of the ability to have a true education that will prepare that child for the future. It was about that child going home hungry, really, to a house that's consistently food insecure. It's about that child possibly even being homeless or living in totally inadequate housing. It's about the fact that that child's parent is most certainly subject to mass incarceration that afflicts our entire community. It's about that child having a target on his or her back. And certainly that child's father, and most likely the child's mother as well, being absolutely, positively terrified when they see a police car in their rearview mirror. It's about all the things that afflict Black people in this country that makes learning a struggle for that child. So the superficial things of just all getting together and appreciating each other's skin color is totally or nearly totally irrelevant. And very frankly, it's a cop-out. Because as long as we're talking about, I've got plenty Black friends and I really appreciate the way you all sing and dance, although they didn't use those exact words, but that was the spirit of it, is really a way of avoiding dealing with the fundamental issues. And the fundamental issues is we have to address the imbalance of power. We have to address economic inequalities. We have to address the fact that any one of you with a wonderful education and wonderful background and wonderful qualifications sitting next to a Caucasian person with the same background is going to make half or at best 2/3 of the money that your white counterpart makes. It's about the fact that on average, white families and Black families with the same backgrounds, the white family owns 10 times the wealth of the Black family with the same credentials. It's about the fact that any one of us sitting here as Black women is subject to dying in childbirth at a rate 4 or 5 or sometimes even 10 times higher than a white woman. It's the fact that any one of us who are well qualified, well educated, probably above average income, is more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman of low income who was a high school dropout. That is systemic racism. And until we address those facts, all the singing kumbaya and holding hands and smiling at each other doesn't mean anything at all. I yield the rest of my time.
Preach. Thank you so much, Camille, for those opening remarks. You hit the nail on the head about what we're talking about in the heart of it. And so, Chaunte, what perspectives would you like to add about a key thing that was missing from the governor's conversation on race that you want to lift?
So as I watched the telecast the governor said, besides people from the community that are on the front lines were not present to give a perspective of what's really going on in the community and addressing the needs that we have, Black women were not there. We are the heart of our community. And how can you have a forum without the heart of the community, right? And so to see the men on the stage discuss issues within the community superficially and not dive deep in what's going on, how we can reach across the aisle and bridge towards each other was disheartening, and it was a cop out. And what I was interested in learning was how are we going to train our police officers for more inclusion, de-escalation, them coming into the community and vice versa, so we can figure out exactly what's going on, the reason why there's such a divide, and move forward. So that was just disheartening to not see that at the table. So I yield the rest of my time as well. Those are my sentiments.
Thank you, Chaunte, for that perspective about the absence of the voices of women and being the heart of the community. So appreciate that perspective. Skye, what do you think? What's the key thing that was missing from that conversation that you want to lift?
Good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to pause and acknowledge that the land that I am streaming from is that of the Wichita, Kickapoo, and Osage people, and I thank you, and I thank your nations. Again, my name is Skye Latimer. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I love being a Black woman. One of the panelists mentioned getting uncomfortable. It was a large part of the conversation, and making new friends or going to church where you had to clap one beat, which as a former dance teacher really just took me out, and I appreciated that bit of levity. But if we have a meal with them, then what? Hearing about our experience is a nice gesture, but what are you willing to do after you hear about our pain and our trauma, and then do the work within yourself to combat white supremacy and white privilege in your circles of awareness and influence? It's not enough to simply not be racist. You have to actively seek to be anti-racist, and that was not mentioned in the conversation. That means dismantling systems that oppress Black people and people of color. And, here in the Bible Belt, we are supposed to go forth and make disciples of all the nations. I think that it was very telling that we're so eager to go forth and tell people about a burger joint that we love or a new Apple product and things of that nature, or candidates, or especially here in Oklahoma, weather people that we love or don't for that matter. But why, instead of telling your networks about the pain, the abuse, and the trauma and neglect that Black people are facing at the hands of police, is it a question of if our stories are true and if our trauma is true? Learning our stories, if people are not willing to take action, is like learning to read but still only viewing coloring books, or learning to ride a bike but only ever walk. If we don't move beyond breaking bread together, then it's a waste of time. I think that was missing from the conversation. They said that, or the question was posed, why is this still happening in 2020? The question should also be, why did this nation need to be colonized when it was already thriving? Why did chattel slavery need to be invented? And sitting with that whiteness and doing that soul digging and reflection, that is becoming an ally, and that is doing the work, and that was not dug into. If you are simply having dinner or coffee in spaces that aren't even safe for Black people to live, then that's not enough. It was very telling that multiple times the governor asked in different ways, how can the community make the job of law enforcement better? How can policymakers make it easier for police? And how can we all as a community support the police? But I really wish that he had asked what he and other elected officials can do to support the community. What can decision makers do to get out of the business of defunding things like education and mental health and put those dollars and that energy into preventative measures that move Oklahoma off of the highest killings by police list, the highest rates of food insecurity, the highest mass incarceration in this country and in the world. Chief Gibson said that the level of stress and trauma that the police endure is just out of this world. And I believe him. I can't imagine what it must be like to put on a badge and a gun and enforce the law every day. But I can tell you exactly what it feels like to be a Black woman married to a Black man, raising a Black son in this country. I can tell you exactly what it feels like to have to work twice as hard, just like Camille said, to be seen and to be heard. I can tell you what it feels like to walk into white spaces and know that all they see is the color of my skin and couldn't care less about my accolades. And in those situations, they often assume I'm the help, right? I can tell you what it feels like to not be given a seat at the table, even when I'm the expert or the key resource. And I know exactly what it feels like to be in a state of constant simmering rage, which so many Oklahomans are just becoming awakened to. And now they're taking the streets and they're demanding for their voices to be heard. And so I ask our governor, our policymakers, our decision makers, are you watching? Are you listening? Do you care? Will you make room at the table? And will you defund the police and reallocate those funds to services that will actually make the jobs of our law enforcement easier? Then maybe Oklahoma will be a place worthy of being at the top of the places to live list. Thank you. I yield my time.
Skye, thank you for those powerful, powerful comments that you left us. A lot to digest there. So thank you so much for that. Councilwoman, what in your thoughts were missing from the governor's conversation on race?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with other ladies who share the sentiment, and I won't repeat thanking the land, but I won't say the land, but thank you, Skye. She's already blessed it, and we appreciate that because obviously we do know this is the land that does not belong to us. And I quote, I think of a James Baldwin quote, which I have shared during this time. It's to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all of the time. And that literally explains where we are as Black women, where we are in a society where you are continuously told, wait, not right now, you're not welcome here, or go back to Africa. In what my opinion, what was missing from that conversation, one, was togetherness, cohesiveness, of being able, you had your governor and the first lady on one side, and you had everyone else on the other. So there already separates the conversation, and that's where you started the conversation, separating. And we've been separate for far too long. So if you really want to dig deep into having constructive conversation, you have to get together. You have to get uncomfortable. You have to meet people at the table, as we've already heard. So those were that was a lot of it. I think also when we're mentioning the lack of voices at the table to speak on what we heard, obviously you cannot discount the Black woman in any conversation when you have a conversation about race, because she has to be the mother, and sometimes in certain situations, but that goes across any culture, she has to be the father too. So we know as those Black men, I'm sure they reference how they had to be taught and told, you can and can't do this, put your hands up, put your hands at 10 and 2, and those things. But we miss the fact that or the account of a Black woman saying how difficult it is to have that conversation with her Black child. How difficult it is for her to go out every day and just pray to God that wherever her child roams, that they will be coming back home because of the atmosphere of what's taking place in our society. How the Black life is not valued. How you just continue the cycle. And she doesn't want that child to be hers, that she sees across the screen of another one. that has been claimed as far as dying at the hands of whatever it may be, whether it be black on black crime, as people like to claim we're notorious for, but we're talking right now about the injustices of crimes that have been occurring at the hands of others who don't value our black bodies. So that's what we have to consider, those conversations. And I think even with someone who had experienced this type of trauma should have been at the table to speak, to say, I lost my son, I lost my daughter in this difficult way. And they can talk about how devastating it was for them to experience that, because I think that's where we all lack. For if we have not encountered someone who has experienced this, you'll never be able to say you empathize or you have sympathy for, if you never know what it's like to walk in someone's shoes that has experienced something to this magnitude. So those are the things that I felt, obviously in my own space as an elected official. I think of the influence of Hannah Diggs Atkins when she was the first African American woman elected to Oklahoma House of Representatives, and that was just in 1968. So that wasn't even that long ago. So I think about those things, and I can't even imagine what it was like for her to be an elected official, a policymaker on the state level at that time, and be the woman, the only woman, African-American woman, to speak to her community, and for people to have to take her seriously. I can't imagine what that was like for her. So, and in this space, I think about the legacy of Willa Johnson being the first African-American to ever serve city council since it incorporated in 1890. I can't imagine what it was like for her as I sit in this same seat that she once held. It's difficult as African-American women, and being an educated woman, and you're still discounted because people don't think you know what you're talking about. So those are things. All in all, I know I kind of probably got off the subject with that, but I've been in a rage. About frustrations and about just not valuing the Black woman for quite some time. And it's very difficult to navigate those spaces, again, that are told they are not for you. Wait your turn. And I've been told those things. Not right now. I don't think you're ready. And then when you get in these spaces, they say, yeah, I told y'all, she's an angry Black woman, or you name it, you hear it. And it's difficult to be able to navigate in those circles and in those spaces. But again, we have to continue to have the conversations to make people aware that we are present, we are women, and we are Black women, and we matter just the same.
Thank you. I mean, that's not off topic at all. I mean, it gets to the heart of the matter of what we're talking about, and the exclusion of Black women in these important conversations. And so I hope that those who are watching this live are really taking in these amazing tidbits of information that each of these incredible women are offering us today. And just wanted to remind you before we get into the comments of Reverend T. Sheri Dickerson, if you have questions, please put them in the live comment. And I want to remind you that if you say something disparaging, it's going to be screenshot and deleted. So think twice and think thoughtfully on what you write and how you want to write it. So Reverend Dickerson, what was missing from the governor's conversation that you would like to lift here?
I don't know what more that I could add. That this amazing group of powerful Black women, my sisters, have already spoken. But I have to be honest and I want to be transparent, is that I did not watch the entire thing because it obviously was not centered on things that were about Black lives. So one of the things that was missing was intentional intersectionality. One of the things that was missing was deliberate inclusion. And certainly one of the things that was missing was the buy-in by Black people. As I knew that it was on, I was having conversations with many of my friends, fellow clergy persons, in this state and across the country because we turned it off because we realized they didn't really desire for us to be there. As Miss Landry spoke, it was quite milquetoast in the entire centering of that particular program. And so I don't know. I kept asking myself, I wonder what were they really trying to accomplish? Well-meaning white folk often do things without consulting the impacted communities that they're speaking on. That was missing, and it continues to do so. And what is also missing is the acknowledgement that that was a failure, unless it was their intent to continue to erase and dilute the voices of Black people, especially the voices of Black women, when constantly the foundation of this country is built on the strength, the ingenuity, and the programming of Black women. We have birthed nations. We have nursed nations. We have led, and we continue to. And so until they learn to trust Black women and not only call on us when they get into a jam because they didn't do the things that even they know is necessary, which is having Black women lead, then we will continue to see these type of failures in every different structure. And what was missing was the intentional attempt to continue to dismantle the systems of white supremacy. What was missing was them calling out and speaking against racism and acknowledging their own principles of racism that exists within them and that they lead with that. What was missing were the questions that they should have been asking Black women of how to change, not only on an individual level, but within the systems. This was held by the leader of this state. And did they even consider calling on any of these women that sit with me today, my sisters, or there is a plethora of powerful Black women in this state that give voice, that do the work, and have continued to do so since this state was founded. They didn't ask questions because we would have told them to make sure that you acknowledge that you are speaking on stolen land. We would have told them that you should say that we're going to give the land back. We would have told them that reparations are appropriate and necessary. And we should not have had to, but we would have told them that Black Lives Matter and why. So all of these things are what was missing. And if I had had the opportunity, I would have taken off the role as clergy. I would have taken off the mantle of community leader, and I would have issued a plea for them to continue to be intentional in the desire to change. And I don't think that we necessarily are still wanting an apology. What we're wanting is for them to be different and to work with us in implementing change, be ready to offer and stand in roles of support, and having the systems of white supremacy continually trying to take up all the space, all the time, and make sure that only voices that agree with theirs or fall in line are presented. So I wish they would have had the courage and the tenacity to have Black women in that conversation, because it would have turned out a whole lot better. Truth would have been spoken, and understanding would have been part of the system of reconciliation that this state surely needs, that this country surely needs, and that they surely don't seem, they are remiss in understanding that that is what is needed.
Preach. Preach.
Ashe.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're going to go to our next question. A reminder, post your questions if you have questions that you want lifted to the panelists, because this is an opportunity to learn and engage from these incredible, powerful Black women that we're showcasing today. So the first question that we're going to go into, that you touched on it, each of you touched on it, that it's not just about how people of different races treat each other. Our conversations on racism stagnate when we solely focus on these interpersonal interactions. So can you talk about those instances of systemic and institutional racism that you've seen personally? So we'll start with Councilwoman Nice, and then I'll direct on who speaks next.
Systemic racism, I mean, I can go to the store and tell you systemic racism when I walk in the store. And I mentioned this in my council comments, I believe last week or the week before. You know, I walk into the store and people still clutch their purses and clutch their bags. And, you know, I'm a Black woman. Sometimes I'll be dressed in my jeans with a hole in the knee. Sometimes I'm dressed up. It doesn't matter. People still do it. And to me, that's intentional systemic racism. You know, that is something that people don't have to do, but they do it because I'm Black. They do it because they feel I'm a threat, when, you know, they don't even know that I'm an elected official. So what business do I have stealing anything you have? But the case happens every day. So that's one example. When we're looking at just different structures of just operating in this space where I am now, I'll speak to a couple of things that have taken place, and being very transparent. It's very unfortunate that we have to have these types of conversations, but as Black women, anytime we're passionate, anytime we're passionate about a subject, or we're passionate about the things that we love the most, we're seen as angry Black women. And that's the difficulty in trying to get things done, when people take your passion for a rage of anger, when in fact, you know when you're in a rage of anger and when you're passionate about what's taking place around you and in front of you. And I can't help but to be passionate about what's going on, as far as me being in the space of wanting to run for office, because there was a fire lit to say, I want to do something for my community. You know, I didn't know I would have to pay the ultimate price for me to do that, but I didn't know either that the system would be the way it is for me to do the work that I need to be done. So it's very difficult to navigate through those structures and those circles. But there was a case instance where I had someone from city staff, and she was a Caucasian woman, come in my office before council meeting. And she was kind of briefing me on something that she wanted to say. We wanted to see if we could do it in the community. And I was very frank with her. I wasn't rude, never raised my voice. I said, you know, I don't want to throw pennies at Black people. And I have the right to say that, because in this instance, in this conversation, it was true. I didn't want to do that when I know we could work on other projects in order for us to make it look different for the community, because I'm the one who has to have the conversation with the people that I serve in order for them to say, I don't know about that, or how do we move forward? And she took that very personally, and that was very disappointing. And throughout the meeting, our council meeting, I realized that her face was stone red, as if she had been crying. And I found out that she had been crying, literally crying all day during that council meeting. And I was taken aback, and I was confused at the same time why she had been crying, because I was never rude to her. I never, again, raised my voice in speaking what I said. And then the next day I called and I said, can I see you? And I just want to talk to you. So we did that. And again, I told her, I said, were you crying because of what I said? And she said yes. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about that. And she went on to basically say how of what I said, I guess she assumed and took it personally. And I said, well, I don't apologize for what I said, but I do apologize for the sensitiveness of how you received what I said. And that was not acceptable. Before the conversation ended, she was crying again and left. And mind you, these are the spaces I have to navigate through because her position is really one that is important for our city and for me to get things done. And it's very difficult to be able to have those types of conversations in a difficulty that we live in and have to operate in and navigate in anyway. And as a Black woman in leadership, I have to deal with that, and to me, I don't know how to receive that. I felt it was a microaggression, but the white fragility of her and not interacting with a Black woman in the manner in this type of role, I believe she didn't know how to do that, and it's very unfortunate. And there are many of her, is what I'm basically saying. There are many of these types of people that makes it hard for us to navigate through the circles that we need to navigate through, because people take it personally, and then therefore after they take it personally, they're going to do everything that they can to shut you down and to shut whatever you're trying to do for either your community, your job, or just your neighbor. They're going to do everything they can to shut those circles down. And that's the most unfortunate piece. But, I can go on and on about different instances and just racial structures in general. But I mentioned that because it happened most recently. And I guess I'm still bothered by that because it's still very difficult and awkward to navigate through.
Now, thank you for your vulnerability and being able to tell these real stories, because I think it's necessary for those who are watching to hear these real stories that Black women face in the workplace, especially as an elected leader. So, Camille, I'm going to go to you next. Talk about these instances of systemic and institutional racism that you've seen, because as we talked about, it's more than just interpersonal.
I want to talk about systemic racism as the underlying climate of America. I like to tell people that racism is so pervasive in America that, and I'm stealing a quote from somebody else, that when you criticize racism, many Americans think that you're criticizing America. When you talk about white privilege, a lot of white people get very rankled about it and say, well, I'm not racist, and furthermore, I'm not privileged. I had to work for everything I have. But basically, racism is so much a part of the fabric of America that saying, is America racist, is kind of like saying, is a fish wet? Well, darn tootin', the fish is wet if it's alive. If the fish is dry, it's one very dead fish. Racism is to America as water is to fish. It is the environment in which America lives. It's the environment that created America. Genocide toward Native people, indigenous people, and the enslavement of African people is what created this country and what continues to control it. And so White privilege is invisible to white people in the same way that air is invisible to us land dwellers and water is invisible to fish. White privilege is an invisible package of unearned assets. If you say to somebody who's the height of an average basketball player that it's hard to get your favorite cereal off the top shelf of the supermarket aisle, it'll come as a surprise to them because they've been tall for as long as they can remember. But if you tell that story to somebody who's 5 feet tall, they'll say, oh yeah, right, no, right, I get it. The environment that white people live in is an environment that is constructed for the advantage of white people. Some people take better advantage of that than others. If you're poor and inherently disenfranchised and white, you have a tougher time dealing with working your way out of that. But it is not necessarily pitched against you in the same way it is against every Black person. Take Barack and Michelle Obama. Wonderfully educated, their pants don't sag, they don't speak using Ebonics, they have very good manners, they went to Ivy League colleges, and they were still called niggers. It doesn't matter how well spoken, how well educated you are, how well behaved you are according to white society. You can't work your way out of the aspects of racism. And ultimately, they were never and never will be, I'm pretty sure, as wealthy as their white counterparts who have held that office. By the way, white privilege means, to get off the subject of presidents and other people who are very privileged in their own right, it means that the average white person has advantages that the average Black person, that will never accrue to the average Black person. Driving down the street, you don't have to worry about whether or not you'll die as a result of a traffic stop. It would never occur to you to wonder whether or not the school you go to will have textbooks in your math class or in your history class. It is probably not an issue whether you go to the hospital. This is something that happened to me 2 weeks ago. I went into the hospital and they were all pretty sure I was there asking for drugs. And I was dismissed from the hospital without ever having been treated. And when my physician, who is a Muslim woman from Pakistan, heard about this, she called the hospital and read them the Riot Act. And they were like, well, we just behaved according to protocol. Because the protocol is that when a Black woman enters the hospital, one must first check to make sure that that Black woman is not drug seeking, irregardless of that person's personal history or any other evidence to the contrary. That is structural racism. And that is something that every Black person, every brown person in this country experiences every day. Structural racism is the heartbreak that every Black woman in America suffered when we heard George Floyd call out for his mama.
Ooh. Speak on it. Yes, ma'am. Skye, what are your thoughts about systemic and institutional racism and moments that you've seen that reflect systemic and institutional racism?
You know, I shouldn't be at my place of work where I spend most of my time, not even with my family, and be told that I belong to someone while I'm on the clock. I should not have instances where I'm being told that I better fit the aesthetic of the brand or of the presentation when I'm wearing a long straight weave that meets Eurocentric standards. This curl pattern right here, I know y'all can't see it, like, this is beautiful and it smells good too. I think that it is astonishing that we still have these moments where our students at OU, where they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars, where they are living and eating and breathing and sleeping, and they are being harassed, and they have the burden of carrying racism when they are supposed to be getting their education so that they can learn your languages, they can learn your math, your science, to go out to be underpaid and to have to fight for everything that white people get handed to them. I think that it's interesting that Councilwoman Nice told that story, because we as Black women, we don't get to fall apart. We don't get to have those feelings. We have to keep a straight face. We have to keep pushing on, because then that furthers that story of the angry Black woman or the over passionate Black woman, as if that's some sort of crime. Passion is a beautiful thing. I think that it speaks a lot that we can be in all of these spaces and not get to fully enjoy these things. I think that it speaks a lot to the fact that when I became pregnant with my beautiful and perfect Black son, that I don't get to fully experience the joy of preparing, shopping Etsy and getting my present ready to tell my husband, because I live with the duality of the joy and the excitement and also the anguish and the pain that will come, that white women don't experience, and that we have to hold dear.
I felt that a whole lot, especially when you talked about the coils of our hair. I mean, as a person who's engaged in public policy and lobbying, I was even afraid to get twists in my hair, because I was worried that I wasn't going to be taken seriously in my work, because I'm one of the only people in my age group. Well, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 of us who lobby at the Capitol. And I finally had to come to a place where I had to accept me, and I had to walk in my beauty and the way that the hair grows out of my head. But we know that there's a lot of young Black girls, because of policy, can't walk around with hair that looks like ours, because they'll get suspended from school, right? So I think that's such an important point to raise about systemic racism, and even through the lens of being a mom, that I appreciate you lifting here in this space.
May I say, Bailey, as you talked about the hair, that made me think of even I wear my natural hair as well, and I remember there was a young Black girl, and she said, and her mother said, "I love that you wear your natural hair because my daughter gets to see that."
Oh.
You know, and these are things that people don't, you know, I this is just me, this is my crown, but you know, it's important for other little girls to see your crown is just as important, and it must be seen.
Absolutely, completely agree. Reverend Dickerson, what do you think about racism from a systemic and institutional standpoint? What have you seen?
I want to +1 everything that has been said, and piggyback to say that a Black woman's crown has been damaged by intentional plans to try to disparage our beauty. And they've wanted us to adopt European culture, and they tell us what beauty is, and they tell us that it is not us. And they try to implement policy to change or prohibit us from wearing our hair the way it grows from our scalp. They try to create policy to prohibit us from wearing our hair the way it grows from our scalp. And so how offensive is that? It angers me. And so when I see institutional racism, it reminds me of young Black students who are not allowed to have certain hairstyles, like the one that I have, choosing the lifestyle of locks. Again, this is how it grows from my scalp. I think of institutional racism when I think of my sisters who, and I realize that racism in any form is so normalized that even sometimes we fall into the nuance of it. And I want to be one that holds myself accountable. There was a situation yesterday where I did not make sure the voice of one of my sisters that I love and hold dear, that is with us tonight, was included in the conversation, and that her work and efforts were highlighted. I own that. I apologize for that. And it brought to my attention how easy it is for us to misstep. Institutional and systemic racism makes us, it's gaslighting, because they try to tell us that what we experience, what we perceive, what we see, and everything that we acknowledge and name in our life is not actually happening. They tell us that when we're interacting with police officers, when we say that I can't breathe, they tell us that we are not telling the truth. And they don't acknowledge that many of us don't live beyond that particular interaction. And what is such a avoidable and devastating refute to their decision to disrespect the dignity and humanity of a person. I have heard my mother and my grandmother and all of these iconoclasts who talked about how they sometimes felt in a darker hue of beautiful Black skin, and how it is the tendency for white folks and some Black folks and some brown folks and indigenous folks to invite those that have a lighter complexion to conversations because it makes them feel more comfortable. They try to erase those who, literally glean the power from the structure of which they're supposed to be trying to help empower. And then white folks have the audacity to say that they're coming to help empower us when they don't understand how powerful we are, and that it flows from within each of us from the moment we were created. So we don't need your assistance in obtaining, maintaining, or distributing power. Institutional and systemic racism redlines us to where we cannot own property. It brings gentrification into my neighborhoods, and they don't acknowledge it, to where my grandmother's house is assessed low enough for $5,000 or $6,000, so that those systems that want to take away from us because they know the beauty of Northeast Oklahoma City, they assess it low enough to where they can purchase it, and then they force us out, or they implement the policy of eminent domain. And they just say that we're going to beautify this area or make it more functional by widening the highway. And they don't care about taking the homes that are generational property. And so it's hard for me to just silo the conversation about it, because it is more American than anything else in this country. It is the system that
It's pervasive.
Yes, was formed on. And so I'm just sick of it, and I'm boiling over. And I'm certainly glad that I have voice with my sisters.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you. I mean, so much truth of how even Black and brown folks can fall into these systems and then what they look like. I love the example of highways. When we build highways through neighborhoods, that decreases economic development opportunity. It decreases, it takes away neighborhoods that have been there generationally. You said that so well. And I hope folks take that opportunity to do research about that over time and how that contributed to even divided neighborhoods, right? So thank you for that. Chaunte, I want to get you into this conversation on systemic racism and institutional racism that you've seen.
So with me, can everybody hear me? I know I was muffled before. Right. What I experienced when I was in middle school, and my best friend at the time was white, and she had an American boyfriend. He was a dark skin complexion, and when you're naive, you don't understand that there is racism when you're in middle school, when you're 11 years old. We were in the car and going to her house because I was spending the night at her house. And she saw her boyfriend, and she told her daughter, "I don't understand why you have to date a blue black." Right? Now, in middle school, hearing that, not knowing what that was at the time until I asked my parents and I saw them the next time I was home, I was like, what do they mean when she said blue black? And, my mom had to, educate me as far as that is, a racist term, and there is a darker complexion. And is viewed differently because you are African American, even if you're dark skin or light skin or this or not. As a child, I was first exposed to that. That was my first instance of knowing that there's racism. Before that, I did not know, right? Another time I was at Oklahoma State, and we were in the Colvin Center with my girlfriend, and we were sitting around talking after we were exercising, and this young lady, she was Caucasian, and she came over and she was staring at us for a long time while we were talking. So I was like, maybe we were being a little bit too loud, and we're tired, we were hanging out. And she came over and she was like, "Can I ask you a question?" And we were like, "Sure, what's up?" And she's like, "Do Black people take baths? Do they wash their hair? Do you use soap? Do you use a washcloth?" And I looked at her and I was like, "Really?" And she was a small town in Oklahoma. And I was like, "Yeah, we do. Every single day. When we wash our hair, when we use a washcloth, and we use soap, And in that moment, that was a teaching moment to educate her that we are human, right? In healthcare, I'm a frontline worker. When I go into patient's room, I come in and I introduce myself. I'm Chaunte. I've been working in physical therapy, XYZ, And for the most part, they're not expecting me to be the person giving treatment. They're expecting my tech as a counterpart, who happens to be white, who's going to give the treatment. And one time I was at the hospital working, and I was giving instructions to my patient of how to do a certain exercise, and completely disregarded me and kept talking to the tech of what they're supposed to do next. And of course, my tech, so she could test for eventually. And in that moment, I was not, even though I went to school and passed the board exam, I've been a therapist for a couple of years. In that moment, I wasn't even qualified as an African American to do physical therapy on this individual, because the text that came in on my case in the favor of the therapist. So I start to look at those different circumstances that I've experienced personally in my life. And I always wondered, when did or why do Caucasian white people do not see African Americans as humans? When did that start? I can say it started in colonial times and capitalism, stuff, but why does it continue to keep being are not human, that we have a heart, that we have a family, that we have, attributes that contribute positively to society. And so until we break down that mentality of we are human, we are here, we're going to continue to have racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaunte. I appreciate those comments and perspectives, especially as a frontline worker, because oftentimes people look for the professional and they walk right past Black women because that's not expected. So I appreciate you adding that example. Camille, you wanted to add a little bit to this conversation. So what did you want to add to this conversation on institutional racism?
I'd intended to say this first time and I got hung up thinking about yesterday's funeral. But I want to say that institutional racism is school disciplinary policies in which students of color are punished at a much higher rate than their white counterparts. It's the criminal justice system where Blacks are arrested, charged, imprisoned, and put to death at rates many times higher than that of their white counterparts for crimes that they commit at rates no higher than their white counterparts. Institutional racism is hearing from everyone from our teachers to our president, although I don't claim him, that Africa, the continent of our ancestors, is a fill-in-the-blank whole place filled with ugly, ignorant savages when it's in fact the birthplace of humanity and a place filled with wonder, richness, and wisdom, and the source of our collective power. Institutional racism is the experience that we have in most employment sectors in which day-to-day operations as well as hiring and firing practices can significantly disadvantage workers of color, and in which Black women take a double or triple threat as women, as people of color, and often as mothers. That's intersectionality working against us in a variety of ways. Systemic racism is dying earlier, often before or shortly after birth, suffering higher rates of most diseases, suffering hunger, suffering homelessness, poverty that are legislated into existence through public policies and then enforced by a literal occupying army that shoots to kill. That is systemic racism. It cannot be cured by having dinner with somebody and singing Kumbaya.
And that's that on that. Thank you, Camille, for breaking it down. We really appreciate that. And all of the perspectives shared this evening. I mean, this is wonderful conversation. I want to transition to our next question. And it's going to tie into actually one of the audience questions that that was proposed. And so let's talk about why Black women's voices are excluded from tables. We often hear the term allyship. So what can and should the listeners do, or the people who are watching, do to better elevate the voices and perspectives of Black women? Particularly the question we got from the audience is, how can Black men do better to elevate and protect Black women? And so let's try to keep our comments to 2 minutes so we can get to the other questions that are being offered to us. But let's start with Skye. How would you answer that question? Why are Black women's voices being excluded? How can people better elevate the voices and perspectives of Black women? And what can Black men do to help elevate Black women?
Yeah, so I would start by saying a simple retweet is a great way to start on Twitter. Sharing to stories. I work in the social media field, and so hitting the share button or a like or commenting, that tosses content into people's feeds, and it allows for the algorithm to be seeing those things. So if you are following Black authors, Black creatives, Black scientists and doctors and people doing the work, amplify those stories, amplify that research, amplify that art. For having to work so hard and to go the extra mile to be seen as less than equal still, it means a lot that people take time to appreciate and value what we put our passion into. When we put our passion into these things that in the boardroom is seen as an angry Black woman. So a simple retweet is great. And there's been a lot of conversation from allies about, I've received so many text messages and emails and calls about asking if I'm okay and how my world feels. And I'm at a point right now where I have time, where I have the energy to answer those questions. But if you are amplifying voices and if you're asking those questions, start with, are you in this space to answer these questions? Because when it's fresh off of seeing our brother having a knee on his neck and watching his last breath, I can't answer your question. I can't tell you to read White Fragility. I can't tell you to go listen to this artist who has done a poem. Listening and finding the right timing in that, I think is especially key.
Skye, I'm gonna add another piece to what you said, because I think that's powerful, that timing matters, that relying on your Black woman friend to be that one to give you all the answers and all the guidance and all the support isn't always helpful. That adds another element of stress onto Black women who are already having to deal with showing up to the workplace, 100% while balancing all of these challenges and barriers on our shoulders. But most importantly, pay these Black women. Don't have them do all this labor for free. Pay these Black women. So let me move on before I start preaching over here. Councilwoman, what would you have to add to that? So why are Black women's voices excluded? What can people do to be better allies and amplify the voices of Black women? And what can Black men do to help support Black women?
Well, let me say, I think if we read and research, we will understand that Black women are the most educated women or group in our country. So that can never be taken away from us. But what does happen is that we are discounted. While it can't be taken away, we are discounted. So I would say especially for Black men, if you are in that room and you understand that there's a conversation that needs to be had, you need to speak up. You need to speak out. You need to educate whoever you're talking to in that room about the struggles that even maybe your mother faced as a Black woman, because I'm sure she had struggles raising you as a Black man. Talk about that. But obviously, we have to have those allies give us the space and the platform to ensure that Black women are at the table, that diversity is at the table. And I think, it's fair to mention Serena Williams' husband, literally co-founder of Reddit, resigned and said, I am giving my board space to a Black person because their voice needs to be heard. We need to amplify those voices. And he gave his seat up for somebody else. So those are the things we have to do. If you know a conversation needs people that are not at the table, which is why we're even having this conversation, you need to make sure people are there. You need to make sure Black women are always at the table, especially, in the time such as this, as we are experiencing the death in the wake of Breonna Taylor and a George Floyd and, a Sandra Bland, and who knows who it'll be tomorrow, because we know it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop, unfortunately, but you have to continue to say and listen to those voices. And one of the things, I'll give this example and I'll be done too. Just recently, I'm part of the River Sport Foundation board. And the reason I'm there serving as the council member for our city council. They have a seat for those members. So I serve on that. And one of the things that happened in the conversation, I went to the social media and I looked at it and I said, at the end of our meeting, I said, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but what is our response in the wake of what's taking place around us in our country? And it was quiet, because I don't think they were ready to have that conversation quite yet, because I am the only African American, and I believe I'm the only African American woman or person of color at all And not, I take that back, I'm not. But as far as the African American woman, I am the only one at the table. And I had to explain to them, if we are truly going to be a place of refuge for our young people, to say we want them to be in this space, we have to walk the walk. We have to commit ourselves to what is taking place around us. And after a conversation around that, one of the past board chairs, he said, you're right. And he pledged $25,000 for our Black kids to be a part of the river sport area. So it's those types of uncomfortable conversations that we have to move the needle. But if we're not in the room, we will never be able to do that. And I reference even the next day. I know I'm over my 2 minutes, but this is my last sentence. But I know the next day they sent out an email, and the subject matter was Black Lives Matter, and they wrote poignantly about why it's important for them to be just as interested in what's going on as the rest of our country. So and I appreciate them for that. They were very vulnerable. And if we're not in the room to have the conversation, people will never be able to learn from us and our experiences.
That's exactly it. And I think your comments are spot on that. It doesn't make sense that Councilman James Cooper was the first Black person elected outside of majority minority district. It doesn't make sense that Representative T.W. Shannon and Representative Marilyn Bell are the first Black man and Black woman elected outside of minority majority districts in the legislature, right? So our white listeners have to think about, why is that? Why are we making space for Black candidates to ensure that there is representation and that those voices are at the table, so that Councilwoman Nice doesn't have to be the only Black woman at the council, right? To ensure that there's more than 3 Black women at the legislature out of a body of 149. I mean, there's definitely not enough women at all. But I mean, when it comes to, there's not even a Latina on in the Oklahoma legislature, right? So there's just so much work that needs to be done. And if you're going to be an ally, you need to actively think about, how do we change that? So I want to move over to Reverend Dickerson. Would you weigh in about why Black voices, Black women's voices, because that's what we're focusing on, Black women's voices are often excluded? What can and should the listeners do to better elevate the voices and perspectives of Black women? And how can Black men better support Black women?
So very quickly, and I say this from a place of vulnerability and pain that I have experienced, and that's in the Black church. Black clergy can understand that a woman is called to preach, to lead, to pastor, to minister, and that she should not have to stand at the podium, that she deserves the right to speak from the pulpit. I wish that the Black brethren would begin to dissect the ideology that comes behind women not having places of leadership in theological settings, and realize that surely, that whatever faith-based space that you represent should not silence, erase, or disenfranchise our voices. So that's one thing that I speak to, that Black men can do. And Black men can also understand that in meekness, there is power and there is strength. And so just because our presentation is different, it in no way means that we are any less proficient or efficient in being able to lead in every faction of life. And when we hear allyship, if I were to speak to my white sisters and my white brothers, and I have those that I consider my family, they took literally and seriously when I said, yes, your bodies should be used to protect us. But they always seem to have an issue when we say, share the wealth that you have because of Black women. So I need them to be intentional in writing the checks. And to my progressive folk and my snowgressive folk and those that say that I am a leftist, I need you to be intentional in adding a few zeros to the left of the decimal point. Step up, show up, and tell me how real you are about being in the movement.
So with that, that's a great segue that for those who want to take an active way to contribute to work that's happening, there is a PayPal link that you'll see on the screen that will contribute to the work that Black Lives Matter Oklahoma City is doing right here in Oklahoma City. So if you want an opportunity to put your money where your mouth is, paypal.me/BLMOKC. So thank you for that, Reverend Dickerson. So Chaunte, we're going to move to you. Why are Black women's voices excluded? What can and should the listeners do to better elevate the voices and perspectives of Black women? And what are things that Black men can do to elevate Black women?
Okay. I think the first part that portrayed in the media, you look at when people view Black women, you look at reality TV, and that's what the representation of what Black women are. We are so much more than that. That's a facet of who we are, but we're also so much more than that, right? So I think when it comes to Black women and how we have a presence, is when we enter a room, you know we enter a room, right? And when people do see us or we're in public, we're in public speaking, we're in private rooms, the automatic notion that people may see is she's going to be loud, she's going to be ghetto, she's going to be intimidating, right? And that is not who we are. We are the queen. We are the intelligent mothers. You know, we have the grandmothers, we have the aunties, like we are the essence of it. Right? We have the wisdom to how can Black men amplify our voices and be there for us, the same way we're there for them. When we speak, we're loud about it, we're protesting, we're defending, we're being a bridge builder. That's the same way that Black men can uplift our voice, amplify our voice, bring us into the room, have a conversation, be our ally as well. As far as my allies go, white allies, how can they assist in this endeavor? I've had maybe 3 or 4 of my white friends call and text me to make sure that I'm okay during this time. Understand how are you mentally handling this, right? It has been difficult. When George Floyd died, literally that next day I woke up like in tears crying. My father. I envisioned my cousins. I envisioned my 2 best friends. That can easily be them running down the street, jogging, exercising, and be shot. That they can literally be pulled over and on the ground and have a knee in their neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That could easily be them. So be the voice. One thing that I've been, when I do have conversations of how they can help, besides financially, is that for so long, African Americans have gone to the church house and the community center and the barber shops and the beauty shops and educated our people of how to be safe or how to be Black in America, right? And it got to a point where I was literally thinking about it. And I was just like, this is no longer our problem. Racism is no longer our problem. White people, it's your white people. You have to go start with your children, educating them of African Americans and different ethnicities and different marginalized communities. You know, it's not just always our responsibility to educate and make ourselves the author where you can, you know, get to know us or whatnot. So when it comes to our white allies, besides financially, after you do the run and you feel good, after you do the protesting with Black people and you feel good, what are your next steps to reach your community and educate them? So that would be my last sentence.
Thanks, Chaunte. Camille, why are Black women's voices excluded? What can and should the listeners do to better elevate the voices and perspectives of Black women, and what can Black men do to help Black women?
First of all, I'd like to say that misogynoir is a thing. Misogyny against Black women is a thing. It is very much a factor in all of our lives. But I want to look at what the roots of that are. Are Black men and Black women natural enemies? Of course not. Is it to the advantage of the forces that oppress Black people to keep Black men and Black women at each other's throats? Of course it is. Are we at all likely to achieve our liberation if we do not unite with our brothers? That would be a hard no. So let's look at the sources of our separation and realize that our liberation is tied up with that of one another. I know there are historical roots to our divisions between Black men and Black women, but let me say to our woke Black brothers, check your brethren, get your brethren, fix this. We are one people and our liberation depends upon each other. And let me say to our white allies, get your people, check your people, fix your people, because racism is a problem of white people. If Black people could fix it, as my grandmama would have said, it would have been done, been fixed. So let us move toward the direction we need to be in, and let us minimize, I'm not saying minimize the dialogue about how to fix misogynoir. I'm not saying pretend that it does not exist, but I'm saying let's remember what the roots of it are, and let us move together in a forward direction and address the true roots of our oppression, and move forward toward liberation together, because that's the only way we're going to reach that goal.
Absolutely, Camille. Thank you for that, because that's an important point to raise. I got to a discussion, an unnecessary discussion with Black men who wanted to play the Olympics on who's killed more often and Black women don't understand and blah, 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 blah. And that shouldn't be it at all. Black men and Black women have to be unified because we're in these struggles together, especially when we're looking at all the disparities that our country faces. We're at the bottom of the rung on all of it. And so we have to stand together. And so I appreciate those comments of addressing misogyny. That's important. Let's go to, well, before we go into that, the last question that I have, and then going into questions from the audience, wanted to also talk about how we need to address systems in our own spaces. So it's beyond just having conversations with our people, but what are the types of conversations that we're having in the workplace when Black people aren't there, right? What are we doing to ensure that we're diversifying spaces in our hiring practices and our recruiting practices for opening positions? Are we standing up when we know that this Black woman or this Latina or this Native American woman is being underpaid in a position, right? When we have the opportunity to speak up. What are we doing to really show up in times where it doesn't feel comfortable? Because racism and addressing it is not about being comfortable. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure the women on this panel will agree, where we had to think about, do I want to take on that battle? Do I want to speak up about that out of fear of being blackballed or being harmed professionally? having character assassinations. Councilwoman Nice already talked about like being painted as the angry Black woman. So there are things that we can think about even in our workplaces and spaces about how we can think about racism on a daily basis and our part in addressing those things. So our last question for me, and then we'll go into a couple of audience questions. Offer 1 or 2 policy solutions that Oklahomans should consider to help us combat racism meaningfully. And let's start with Skye. What do you think? What's 1 or 2 policy solutions?
You know, on this, I could talk about, you know, prison reform and gerrymandering and things like that. But I would, for the sake of time, I would just like to say, please go vote. Please listen to Black women. And I would like to yield the rest of this time to Councilwoman Nice and to Reverend Dickerson, who are more of the experts in this field than I am. And that is being the example of letting Black women have a seat at the table. Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you for that, for passing the baton on that conversation. Councilwoman Nice, I'll throw it to you because we also had a question from the audience where someone said, what are 1 to 3 calls to action that we can take to support you in your work on the council? So you can take it from that lens too.
Okay. Well, I'll say we need to call out those that are in the leadership. And the reason I say that is because we voted in our last budget for a diversity and inclusion position. Guess what? We still don't have it. That's something that I've been speaking to as far as the positions that have been hired. And I know we've heard the mayor say it, which is true. As city council and mayor, we cannot interfere in the hiring, firing, or staff interactions due to our charter. So that is a real thing. I would hope those who are watching will find out when the next charter review committee meeting is, so we can bust that policy wide open as well. And with that, we also have to speak to diversity and inclusion. And I can say myself, every time our city manager has said he's looking at these positions, I said, well, I hope you will consider diversity and inclusion. I hope you will consider diversity and inclusion. I hope you will consider diversity and inclusion. And there has been one time I've had to actually define what diversity and inclusion means on the council floor because a local newspaper decided to say that I was making this a black and white issue when in fact I wasn't. I had to let them know diversity and inclusion does not just mean black and white. I please understand my intersectionality. I am Black, but I am also a woman. So when I say diversity and inclusion, I'm coming from a whole bunch of different spaces when I speak of it. So let's look and be intentional about how we look at diversity and inclusion. And I'm going to give you this fact. Out of our 22 departments, I believe it's 22, and it could be wrong. I have slept and barely slept in the last couple months. We have 1 African-American woman in executive leadership. 1 for our over 4,800 employees that work for the city of Oklahoma City. So those are the policies we have to bust wide open. We have to ensure that we're having, I know there has been a conversation about creating a human rights commission. And it did disband in the late 90s. And to my knowledge from my executive assistant, Mrs. Debbie, she told me that that was disbanded because the state took on that endeavor of a human rights commission, a state human rights commission, which then now is under the leadership and office of our Attorney General. So it does exist. So those are things right now that we can continue to look for, what we can ask for. If you are watching, apply for the boards, commissions, and trusts. Do that. Find out what ward you're in first, then apply. We have MAPS 4 right now, and for our MAPS 4, we have a wonderful Black woman who is taking on the charge, Dr. Monique Bruner, to lead for our MAPS 4. And guess what? She's the only African American and the only African-American woman that's sitting on our maps for advisory board. But we, again, when I say we have to create the space, we have to make sure we create the space. So that was important to make sure we do that. So those are, and you got to show up. Well, when I'm speaking, and I'd say me personally, when I'm speaking about things that are happening in the community, you gotta show up to know what it is. You gotta show up to know what it is, so we won't have the miscommunication steps that have happened in the past. So we can continue to move forward with a full agenda of how we navigate through our city, and especially the Northeast community, which is a very fragile community, especially when it comes to information and transparency. So if we don't show up, somebody else will. And guess what? I need you there to speak to those things, or else everybody else is going to vote against whatever I'm asking for. They're not going to vote in favor of it because everybody else didn't show up. So you got to show up. You got to call. If there are things happening and you're at home, you got to call me and tell me what it is. Call the office. I can't help you if you're not telling me what's going on. So that's how you can help me. Don't complain about me and talk about me on Facebook if you haven't called my office. That's all I'm saying. You can't do. I mean, seriously, and people will tag you all day long saying you're not doing this and you're not doing that. But did you call my office? Did we get it fixed for you? So if you haven't done that, what makes you think I even know what's going on? You know how many people live in Ward 7? Ward 7 is 130 square miles of the city's 620. Do you hear me? 620 square miles for Oklahoma City. I got 130. So I have a whole bunch of different neighborhoods that I have to care for. And I think that's even a fragility of our community as well, when we're looking at these spaces, because I have to be mindful of everybody that lives within that space that I'm serving. So those are the things. Be mindful of that. But I want to help you, but I have to have others help me in the process, because I didn't get here. Again, I'm here. And I'm not perfect, but I didn't run because I'm perfect. I ran because I wanted to make change, and it's going to take all of us in order to do that. But I also say this for our men, and I forgot to mention this, and then I'll be done. With our men, they have to uplift us. They have to uplift us when we're speaking, as Sheri talked about. In my circle, I've had men basically tell me I was not ready to run for office. Wait your turn. You're not ready. And at the same token, those same men didn't even help me get ready. But then they tell you you're not qualified to be a leader. There's no leadership. But if I'm not doing my job, that means all of those senators, all of the representatives, all the school board members, everybody else that has a piece of Ward 7, they're not doing their job either. So, we have to look at that all the way around when we're talking about that. And it's a lot to have on your shoulders as a woman of color serving, the only woman of color serving on city council. I represent all women, and I don't want to do that. Any woman that has melanin, I represent. I don't want to, but I have to, because we have to have a voice. So that just, if you understand those things, that will help me when it comes to helping implement the policy.
Thank you for that, Councilwoman. Appreciate that. I hope that the folks in the live chat are taking notes on ways that they can support and be an advocate at the city level. There were several links that were posted in the live comment chat, so definitely go back on this video, watch it again, and grab those links so you can get engaged in your city, because this is your city. So Camille, I'm going to pass it over to you. What are one or two policies that you think that need to be done in order to address racism?
Well, I think in light of what's going on right now, I think a total revamping of the police force is not only necessary, it's critical to the survival of this country. People are talking about defunding the police, and that's kind of a misnomer, because folks are saying, well, who's going to save me when somebody kicks in my door? I'd like to point out that the police very rarely prevent crime, they respond to it. And approximately, and these are National Justice Department statistics, I love statistics, 80+% of police action is enforcing civil codes. Everybody you know has been stopped by the cops for having a license plate sticker that's out of date, or a tail light that's out, or a traffic ticket, or a speeding ticket, just about. Everybody has this experience. If you've ever been burgled or the subject of assault or something like that, it's very unlikely that the police have returned your stolen goods or found the person who assaulted you if that person was a stranger. Police actually very rarely solve crimes, and they almost never prevent them. Right now, we have a militarized police force that fails to protect citizens, but actually assaults them, as we saw right here in Oklahoma City. Our good governor talked about supporting the police, and not only was I incredulous, I laughed, and I also cussed a little bit, which I tend to do. It's really kind of funny that people talk about supporting the police when the police signed on for that job and are supposed to be supporting me. They joined up. If you're afraid of dogs, you don't become a veterinarian. If you itch when you contact hair dye, you don't become a beautician. If digging in the dirt makes your back hurt, you don't become a gardener. So if you are afraid of having young people throw plastic bottles at you while you're in full riot gear, for God's sake, turn in your badge and your gun and go be a flower arranger or something like that. We need to reform the police. Militarized police need to not be an issue in a free nation, or one that calls itself free. We need to separate those functions. When somebody's having a mental health crisis, they need to be responded to by somebody who is a mental health professional, not by somebody who is bringing superior force, lethal force, into that mix. That's just a start, and I could talk about that all night. Education needs to be reformed. The zip code that you live in should not determine whether or not you get a real teacher or somebody who majored in baton twirling and decided to apply for a job with the school system as the person who's charged with teaching you to read. My props to the people on emergency certificates, but you're not qualified. Okay? Your zip code should not determine your life chances in this world. Educational policy and the way we fund schools and the way we prioritize, or rather fail to prioritize, education in this country has to change, and there has to be racial equity. So I could, again, go on all night, but those two things are critical, absolutely critical. And until we change that, not much else is going to change. Equal pay for equal work. I'm going to turn over the mic because, again, I don't know when to shut up. It's a big issue.
No, I mean, as you powerfully pointed out, there's so many things that we need to do in policy. And I hope that those who are viewing see that there's more to do than just hugging it out kumbaya. There's some real policy work that needs to happen, and it can't happen without your advocacy, you getting informed about these issues, and you pushing your elected leaders to take bold approaches on the things that need adjustment at the local level, at the state level, and federally. So,
can I say one more real quick thing?
Sure.
In the 60s, when America caught fire, a much wiser Lyndon Baines Johnson appointed the Kerner Commission to really look for solutions, actual solutions. At that time and since then, very smart people have come up with workable solutions to address racial inequities. We do not enact them by and large. So the answers are there, and anybody who really wants them, whether we're talking about our mayor, our governor, our president, or the person, or our city council or whatever, only has to pick up their smartphone and Google it.
And there you are. That's that on that.
Bailey. Sure.
Well, I want to pass the mic to Reverend Dickerson to weigh in on a couple of policy issues that you think need to be solved and addressed.
I could listen to this iconoclast, Camille Landry, all day. And I am blessed that I have the ability to do so, because that's my big sister. And so I don't know that I have anything to ask, that I have anything to add. I feel very privileged and honored to me. But one thing I think needs to be changed in many of our elected officials is that they need to receive a livable wage, to where we can broaden the field of those that can actually afford to run.
Reverend Dickerson, let me interject real quick. Nikki, how much do you make as a city councilor?
Oh, you want to go there? I make $12,000 annually.
Thank you.
Wait, let me reference. When I was working, when I had to quit my job at the TV station to run, and unfortunately, I was let go from my primary job the day after I got elected. And please understand, I know people think this is a part-time position, but Ward 7 is not a part-time position. It is a extra full-time job in order for you to see the fruits of your labor and for people to see you doing the work. Even with that, people still say you're not.
Thank you for that, because I think there's a misconception that everybody's making bank as lawmakers, and that's not the case at all. And Black women have to make a sacrifice in order to run. So, Reverend Dickerson, thank you for indulging me on that, but continue, because you raised a point.
No, because I was getting ready to say that I know what the commitment that it takes, and the true integrity that it takes to want to serve in that capacity for something that is not compensated appropriately. Another thing in policy, we need to change how things are prioritized. If we are not expecting our elected officials and the policies to uplift and amplify things that are important to our communities, that means those policies need to either be literally voided or they need to be revamped. And the last thing I'll say is, I think in every form of government, every system or organization, they should begin to provide education about the issues that are important to the communities, every community that is served. And they should let Black women lead the charge, because you can trust us. You can trust Black women, and Black women will tell you that census participation should also be included in every aspect, so that not only that census participation becomes part of your voice, and that is the least that you could do to be able to provide funding to the programs that are actually directly allocated to your community.
Thank you for that. I think that's huge, because we're talking an upwards of $16,000 a person coming back to communities when you take that census. So if you care about community, you'll take the census. If you care about Black folks and you care about the community, then you're going to vote on June 30th, because there's a state question on Medicaid expansion. And we know that there are more than 200,000 Oklahomans in need, or who will benefit from, I'm not gonna say in need of, it will benefit from expanded Medicaid, right? There's an effort right now to add a human rights commission onto the city council, OK number 4HR, that hashtag, look up that hashtag and you can find that agenda there. There's lots of opportunity to get into the work at the federal, state, and national level to elevate things that help make the playing field equalized. And so appreciate all of the comments that have been lifted here so far. Reverend Dickerson, were you about to say something?
I was going to say, and people will commit to voting in every election. those that have the ability to vote, because I realize that there are some, like our undocumented sisters and brothers, who do not have the ability. I think that's a policy that needs to be changed, by the way. And incarcerated persons, we need to relook at that policy to go ahead and replace their rights as soon as they are released. We need you to vote in every election, every time, and be educated on the questions and who you're voted for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You said it so well. I know that Chaunte, you wanted to bring up an event, so I wanted to make sure I made space for you to bring that up as a way for people to get engaged.
Yes, so I know that there is a Black Lives Matter this March this Saturday. Is that correct, Reverend Sheri? And you guys unmute yourself.
So we will list that information on our website. I'm trying to remember. I'm looking at some of my people. What time does our march on Saturday start? At 10 a.m. And we will start at City Hall, and we will be marching to the Oklahoma City Police Department and offering an invitation for the chief and others to come out and address some of the questions, but also to give voice to why some of the policies are in place. And that's not an act of confrontation. It is an actual invitation to say you're able to share with us the position and where you are so that we can understand.
Absolutely. And someone reminded us in the chats that there's more than just a state question on the ballot, but there's sheriff races, there are congressional races and other things. So take that time to go to elections.ok.gov, look at that sample ballot to know what's going to be on your ballot so you can make an informed decision. So our wonderful panelists this evening, thank you all so much for the gems of knowledge that you have thrown on this evening. I know so many people have been touched by what you said, and it's going to help make a difference. And so is there any other final comments that we need to leave before we wrap up this evening?
I would just like to say to the queens on this panel and to all of our Black sisters who are watching, it is going to be hard and it is going to continue to be an uphill battle, but we are resilient, we are powerful, we are strong and equipped and intelligent. It is in our very DNA to keep fighting the good fight, and for people to believe in us and to pass the torch to us. So don't give up, hang in there, and thank you for your light in this world.
Thank you for that, Skye. Beautifully said.
I would like to add. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, please go ahead, Chaunte.
I would like to add. I know at the beginning of the broadcast, before everybody got on, for each team that's on this panel right now, and to be in awe and to sit in the presence of these ladies to get the wisdom that we received tonight. I want to thank each and every one of you. You exemplified we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you, ladies, for showing your wisdom, your grace, your Blackness, your womanhood. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chaunte.
I too want to echo the sentiment of what an honor and a privilege it is to share space with each of you beautiful women, Black women, my sisters, my queens, those that also have stood with us and have attended this tonight virtually. I just want to encourage everybody to continue to make sure that we are protecting ourselves in this time of crisis with this pandemic. On a personal level, I'm going to personally ask you, which is one of the demands that Black Lives Matter OKC issued, is to contact the governor and ask him to be prepared to sign clemency in seeking justice for Julius Jones. If you don't know about it, I need you to become educated and just Google Julius Jones, find out all of the information and understand why there is an international push for him to come home. I am Reverend T. Sheri Dickerson, and I say that Black Lives Matter, Black women's lives matter, and Ashe.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, Google Julius Jones and call for his clemency. That's a big ask. So thank you so much.
I'll say when Black women speak, listen. Our voices are coming from a place of experience, just like you listen to everybody else. Don't discount the magnitude of the Black woman. And I want to thank all the ladies who are here for your gifts and for sharing. And I hope that those who are watching will continue the conversation of understanding how we amplify those voices, especially the voices of Black women, how we amplify Black voices, and especially during this time to let us know that we matter. Our words matter, our experiences matter, and our walk, even though it may be different from yours, it also matters. And we have to call it out. If we see something happening, I hate to say it like this, white privilege is real. And when we see it, we have to call it out. But we also have to have those folks understand that we're not coming of a place of where we're attacking you, but this is of correction for us to move forward in a space, as we heard, we can do it together. So, and I'll say it's not easy. And trust me, I've had a lot of sleepless nights in this space that I serve because the work is hard. The work is not meant for a girl that looks like me to be in it. So I take that and understand it every single day when I get up, because at night I say, you know what, I'm done. I'm not doing this. I'm not going back. But then I get up every morning and say, what can I do to change and help the people? Because that's what I was called to do. So, and these experiences are real. So I just want to let people know that we as Black women, our experiences matter. So please understand that first and foremost. But, we have to continue to share that platform of understanding and listening to our experiences as well.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you for your service. Thanks for your passion and all that you give towards 7 in Oklahoma City. We truly value and appreciate you. You are a gem to us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Camille, I'll give you the last word.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. I want to thank you, Bailey, for pulling all this together. And I want to thank each and every one of my sisters who spoke for their wisdom. Everybody brought a very unique perspective and a lot of wisdom and a lot of power. I want to say to everybody who's listening that these are perilous times that we're living in. We're facing, first of all, centuries-old oppression, but with a new spin that's deeply frightening, deeply troubling. We're facing onslaughts from every direction. But I want to say in the most hopeful and in the most powerful of all possible ways that the answer to our dilemma, the answer to our oppression has always been unity. And it doesn't mean that we all have to march in lockstep. Do what you can with what you've got, where you are. If you're an educator, teach. If you're a cook, cook and feed somebody. If you're a person who knows how to build, then doggone it, build something. If you're a person that doesn't know how to, or thinks that they don't know how to do anything, because there's nobody who truly doesn't know anything, then latch on to somebody else and together come up with something. Do something wherever you are and keep on moving forward. Do not listen to the naysayers who would tell you that there is no solution to your problem. Keep moving forward and remember that Black lives matter, that Black is beautiful, that you are beautiful, and that you are worth something. Remember that our unity is our strength. Can I get an ashe?
Ashe. And on that note, yes. And on that note, we are going to conclude this evening. Oh my goodness, I feel so filled from this conversation. And I thank you ladies for taking time out of your busy schedules to have this conversation today. I again want to lift Erica Lucas and Tracy Zeke for being incredible examples of what it means to be an ally to Black women, for supporting us through and through, and for helping making this moment possible for us to have this conversation. So thank you, ladies. Again, this is not going to be the only conversation. If you thought this was good, you need to make sure that you're following Black Women Voices on Facebook, like that page, and then like or follow Black Women Voices on Twitter. That's when you'll find out when the next conversations will take place and what the topics will be. Because I promise you, if you thought these ladies were excellent, we have plenty more Black women within this metro who have expertise, who are qualified to speak on a variety of issues about systemic racism that is faced here in Oklahoma and beyond. And so they'll be able to weigh in a real way on different issues. And we want you to be able to see Black women who are experts in all these different areas. So thank you for your time. And again, want to lift, if you want to give to Black Lives Matter OKC, paypal.me/BLM OKC to sow into the hard work that I'm speaking to existence, Reverend Sheri Dickerson is putting out here alongside Miss Camille Landry. So we appreciate you all. Thank you for your time, and continue to do good work. As Camille perfectly stated, whatever it is you do, keep moving. Thank you.